My name is Maya. I am 32 years old, and I run a small graphic design studio out of my apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina. 4 years ago, I wired the first of many payments toward my brother's college tuition, a total of $28,000 by the time he crossed the stage. Last May, I found out I was not invited to watch him do it. Not through a conversation, not even through a phone call, through a text message from my mother, sent at 11:17 on a Tuesday night, while I was finishing a client project and eating leftover pasta alone at my desk. It said 7 words. "It's Tyler's day. Please don't make it about you." I stared at that message for a long time. I read it the way you read something that doesn't make sense at first, the way your brain tries to rearrange the words into a different meaning. But the words stayed the same. I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to my work, and I didn't eat another bite of that pasta. My boyfriend had been at his kitchen table when I called him. I didn't even say hello. I just read him the text out loud, and there was a silence on the other end that lasted long enough to tell me he understood exactly what it meant. He said, "I'm coming over." I told him he didn't have to. He said, "I know." He was at my door in 20 minutes, and that was the moment I finally let myself feel it, not the anger. Not yet, but that specific kind of hurt that only comes from a person who was supposed to love you choosing, very deliberately, not to. The truth is, I had been choosing Tyler for years before that text arrived. I had been choosing him since he was 17, and our parents sat across from me at the kitchen table and explained, in the measured voices of people who had already made a decision, that there simply wasn't enough money to send both of us to school. I was 22 and already working. Tyler was the one with potential, our father said. Tyler was the one with a future in front of him. I remembered the way my mother nodded along, the way she folded her hands in her lap like the conversation was already over. I didn't argue. I had already stopped expecting fairness from that table. What I did instead was say that I would help, and I did. Every semester for 4 years. Wire transfers on the first of the month. Textbooks. The laptop he said he needed. The spring break trip to Miami he said everyone was taking. The apartment deposit when he moved off campus junior year. I paid and paid and paid, and every time I did, my mother called it a loan. Tyler never called it anything at all. My boyfriend knew the whole history. He had been with me for 2 years by then, patient in the way that some people are patient not passively, not because they had no opinion, but because they respected that it was mine to carry until I was ready to put it down. The night of the text, he made tea neither of us drank and sat with me on the couch while I pulled up the graduation ceremony information online. The venue held 1,000 people. My parents had tickets. Tyler's girlfriend had a ticket. 2 of his friends from the baseball team had tickets. My name was nowhere. My boyfriend read over my shoulder and said quietly, "So what do we do?" I thought about that question for a moment. I thought about what the alternative was showing up anyway, making a scene, calling my mother and listening to her explain it to me in that particular tone she used when she had already decided I was overreacting. I thought about sitting in my apartment watching the live stream alone, if there even was one. Refreshing my phone for photos my brother would probably not tag me in. Then I thought about Asheville. I had been meaning to go for 2 years. There was an inn I had bookmarked in the mountains, a place with a wraparound porch and a fireplace and a view that a travel magazine had described as the kind of quiet that resets something in you. It was a 4-hour drive from Raleigh, the weekend of Tyler's graduation. I had originally kept the calendar clear so I could be there. I looked at my boyfriend and said, "I want to go to Asheville." He didn't even pause. He picked up his phone and started looking. We booked it that night, 2 nights at the inn. A table at a restaurant in the Arts District that had a 6-week waiting list and had just had a cancellation, a Saturday morning hike to a waterfall I had seen in a photograph once and never forgotten. My boyfriend handled the reservations while I sat beside him, not helping, just watching his hands move across the screen and feeling something I hadn't expected. Not peace, not yet, but the beginning of something that might become it. Before I put my phone away, I did one last thing. I opened the family group chat, the thread where my mother posted photos of Tyler's honor roll certificates, and my father forwarded inspirational quotes, and nobody ever asked how I was doing, and I left. The small notification appeared, and then disappeared, and I closed the app and did not go back. My boyfriend looked at me and I said, "Don't ask." He said, "I wasn't going to." We drove up the Friday morning. The roads out of Raleigh gave way to the long stretch of I-40 West, and then the mountains began to appear at the edges of the sky, blue and hazy and enormous in the way that things are when you have been staring at apartment walls for too long. My boyfriend drove. I had my feet up on the dashboard and the window cracked, and I watched the elevation signs change, and I didn't think about the graduation. I thought about the first wire transfer I had ever sent to Tyler's university a Thursday afternoon in October 4 years earlier. I had been sitting in this same car in a parking lot outside a grocery store, transferring money on my phone while a receipt for $43 of food sat in my lap, and I had felt proud. I had felt like I was doing something real and good. I thought about the last time I had talked to Tyler on the phone, 6 weeks before the text from my mother. He had called asking about a suit for the ceremony. He wanted to know if I could contribute to the cost. I had sent him $250 that afternoon. He had texted back a thumbs up emoji, and nothing else. The inn was everything the photograph had promised. The woman at the front desk called us by name when we walked in, and there was a bowl of shortbread cookies on the counter, and the whole building smelled like cedar and something floral I couldn't identify. Our room had white curtains that moved in the breeze from the window, and a view of the ridgeline going pink in the late afternoon light. My boyfriend dropped our bags and walked straight out to the small balcony and stood there with his hands on the railing, looking out, and I came and stood beside him, and for a while neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said. That evening we sat on the porch of the inn with glasses of wine and watched the sun go down behind the mountains, and my boyfriend asked me something he had never asked before. He asked, "When was the last time you did something just for yourself?" I thought about it genuinely, trying to find the answer, and I realized I couldn't. Every vacation I had taken in the last 4 years had been either a family obligation or a trip I had abbreviated or canceled because something came up. Tyler's semester payment was due, my mother needed help with something, my father's birthday, my brother's move, my brother's whatever it was that time. Even my studio, which was mine, which I had built from nothing at 26 with freelance clients and late nights and a loan I had paid off myself, even that had been dismissed so many times. My side thing, my hobby, the little project I did on my computer, that I had started to hear it in my own head. I told my boyfriend I couldn't remember. He reached over and put his hand over mine and didn't say anything else. The next morning was the morning of Tyler's graduation. I woke up early, before my boyfriend, and sat in the wooden chair by the window with a mug of coffee and watched the fog move through the valley below. Somewhere across the state, my family was getting dressed, checking the time, finding parking. My mother was probably adjusting Tyler's collar. My father was probably taking a photo. I did not feel the pull I expected to feel. I felt the mountains and the coffee and the quiet, and when my boyfriend woke up, I was still in that chair, still watching the fog, and he looked at me and said, "How are you?" And I said, "Surprisingly fine." We had breakfast at a place downtown with biscuits the size of my fist and honey butter and coffee that tasted like it had been taken seriously. My boyfriend ordered for both of us because I was looking out the window at the street, and I let him. And the food arrived and we ate, and the whole morning felt like it belonged to me in a way that very few mornings had. It was around noon when my phone started buzzing. I had it face down on the table and I could feel the vibration against the wood, one after another. And I looked at it and then looked at my boyfriend and he raised an eyebrow. I turned it over. 17 notifications. Missed calls from my mother, then my father, then a number I didn't recognize, then my cousin Bree, who lived in Charlotte and who I had always liked but rarely talked to. I opened Bree's message first. It said, "Are you watching this? Tyler's graduation. Something happened. Call me." Then another message from her 3 minutes later. "Never mind. You probably need to see it yourself. I'm sorry, Maya. I really am." My boyfriend was watching my face. I handed him the phone and told him to find what was happening. It didn't take long. Someone had posted a video from the ceremony, already climbing toward 100,000 views. The clip was shaky, filmed from the stands, and it showed the stage where graduates were seated and the podium where someone was speaking. But the graduate at the podium was not reading from notes. Tyler had been selected to give the student address something my mother had told me about weeks ago with visible pride. Something that had been used as part of the justification for the guest list being tight, selective, just immediate family and close friends. He was up there in front of 1,200 people, and he was delivering a speech, and the speech was beautiful. The problem was that the speech was not his. It took about 4 minutes before the first comment appeared on the university's official live stream, pointing out that the opening 3 paragraphs were lifted, nearly word for word, from a commencement address given at Duke in 2019. Then someone found the second source. Then a third. By the time Tyler finished speaking to applause he would soon wish he had never received, there were 43 comments on the university feed alone, and the compilation post, linking all 3 original speeches, had been shared 200 times. My boyfriend scrolled through it in silence, and then set the phone down on the table. He said, "He plagiarized his own graduation speech." I said, "It appears so." He said, "In front of his parents." I said, "Yes." I picked up my coffee and took a sip and looked out the window at the street where a couple was walking, a very small dog, and I thought about the suit I had helped pay for, and the laptop, and the apartment deposit, and the 4 years of wire transfers on the first of every month. The calls from my mother increased through the afternoon. I declined each one. We went on the hike I had planned 2 hours up a trail that wound through rhododendron tunnels and came out at a waterfall that dropped 60 feet into a pool the color of sea glass, and I left my phone in my jacket pocket and did not take it out once. The trail required attention. The rocks were slippery near the water. My boyfriend held my hand on the steep parts, not because I needed him to, but because he wanted to. Standing at the base of the waterfall, the sound filling everything, I let out a breath that felt like it had been waiting inside me for months. When we came back down and I finally looked at my phone, there were 22 missed calls and a voicemail from my father that I played on speaker for my boyfriend because I wanted a witness to what I was hearing. My father's voice was tight and controlled in the way it got when he was angry but trying to sound reasonable. He said the situation was being handled. He said Tyler had made an error in judgment. He said the family needed to present a united front, and that meant I needed to come home, or at minimum to answer my phone, because reporters from the campus paper had already called the house, and my mother was upset, and this was not the time for me to be doing whatever it was I was doing. He did not ask where I was. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not mention, at any point in the 3-minute message, that I had not been invited to the ceremony I was now being summoned to help manage the fallout from. I deleted the voicemail. My boyfriend said nothing. He just put his arm around my shoulders as we walked back to the car, and I leaned into him, and that was enough. That evening I made what I thought was a mistake and opened my phone at dinner to look at the story properly. It had grown considerably. The video of Tyler's speech had been stitched and reposted dozens of times, each version tagged with the source speeches so viewers could compare them side by side. The university had issued a statement saying it was investigating. Tyler's girlfriend had posted an Instagram story, a simple black screen with white text that said, "I didn't know. I want to be very clear that I didn't know." The comment sections were not kind, but the video that stopped me was not any of those. It was a clip filmed inside the reception hall, after the ceremony, shaky and slightly too close, clearly captured by someone's phone held low. The audio was bad, but the words were clear. My uncle, my father's younger brother, who I had always quietly admired for the way he said things my father refused to, was standing in the center of the room with a glass of water he had stopped drinking, and he was talking to my father, and he was not lowering his voice. He was saying, "Maya paid for this, Richard. She paid for 4 years of this and you didn't even invite her today. She wasn't here. Do you understand that? She wasn't here." My father's response was inaudible. My uncle said, "She wired you $28,000, and you texted her not to come, and you're standing here acting like this is a PR problem?" Someone in the background said something. My uncle said, "I'm not making a scene. I'm saying the truth. There's a difference." The video ended there, the camera swinging away as someone must have moved to intervene. But the clip was 43 seconds long, and it had already been viewed 400,000 times. I sat very still at the dinner table in Asheville with my glass of wine in my hand, and the mountains dark outside the window and the restaurant humming around me, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph. Not satisfaction, exactly. Something quieter and more permanent. The feeling of a thing being named out loud that had lived nameless for a long time. My boyfriend was watching me. I looked up and he said, "You okay?" I said, "My uncle said it in front of everyone." He said, "I know. I saw." I said, "I never expected that." He said, "Sometimes people surprise you." I set my phone face down again. We finished dinner. The food was very good, and the wine was better, and we talked about other things. A project I was hoping to pitch next month, a road trip we had been loosely planning for the fall, a book he had been reading that he wanted me to try. The normal architecture of two people who had chosen to be kind to each other, and I let it hold me. Later, back in the room, I made the decision to look one more time before I put the phone away for the night. My brother had posted a statement on Instagram, 3 paragraphs, carefully worded in a way that suggested someone had helped him write it, which under the circumstances was worth noting. He said he had made a serious mistake. He said he took full responsibility. He said he was sorry to his family. The comments under his post asked, over and over, the same question: "Where's your sister?" Not knowing what he had done to me, but feeling something was missing. The way people do sometimes when a story doesn't add up. I closed the app and did not open it again. The morning we left Asheville, I was sitting on the porch with my coffee when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, a Georgia area code. I almost let it go. Then something made me answer. The voice on the other end was elderly and careful, and introduced herself as Margaret, my grandmother's neighbor. She said my grandmother, my father's mother, a small, firm woman in her late 70s who I associated with Christmas table settings and very strong opinions about thank you notes, had been trying to reach me and had lost my number and asked her neighbor to call. She said, "She wants to talk to you. She says it's important." My grandmother called 2 minutes later. Her voice was the same as I remembered it. Unhurried, precise, slightly formal, even with family. She asked if I was all right, and I said I was. She asked where I was, and I told her I'd been in Asheville for the weekend. She said that sounded sensible. Then she said, "I should have told you something a long time ago, and I'm going to tell you now." I set down my coffee cup. She explained it slowly. My grandfather, who had died when I was 24, a quiet man who I associated with woodworking and encyclopedias and a specific kind of patient attention I had not understood the value of until he was gone, had updated his will in the last year of his life. He had wanted to leave me his workshop property in Asheville, which he had bought in 1987 and which had been rented out as a commercial studio space for the better part of a decade. He had also wanted to leave me a share of his investment accounts, separate from what he left my grandmother and her living expenses. He had told my grandmother his reasons in simple terms. He believed I worked hard and didn't complain about it, and he wanted me to have something that was only mine. My grandmother's voice was steady but effortful, the way it sounds when someone is getting through something they have been carrying. She said that my father had managed the estate. She said that during the process, the updated will had been set aside in favor of the earlier version, and she had allowed it to happen because she did not want to fracture the family. She said she had told herself this for 8 years. Then she said, "I watched what happened at your brother's graduation. I watched my son not call you. I watched the video of Robert saying what should have been said years ago. And I realized I am 81 years old, and I am tired of the wrong people carrying the weight of other people's choices." She told me she had already called the attorney. She told me the property in Asheville, the one I had been sitting near all weekend without knowing it, had appreciated considerably. She told me the documentation was preserved. She told me she was sorry. I sat on that porch for a long time after we hung up, looking at the ridgeline and the morning light moving across it. My boyfriend came out and found me sitting there. He said my face looked different. I told him what my grandmother had said, slowly, watching him absorb it. He asked me how I felt. I told him I wasn't sure yet. He said that was a reasonable answer and sat down beside me. I said, "She said the property is here, in Asheville." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is that why it felt like the right place to go?" I didn't know how to answer that. I wasn't sure anyone could. The drive back to Raleigh was quieter than the drive up had been. Not heavy lighter, actually, in the way that things are after you finally understand the shape of something that has been pressing against you. My boyfriend drove again, and I watched the mountains flatten back into Piedmont and thought about the last 8 years with a clarity I hadn't had access to before. The messages from my mother began the afternoon we got home. Not calls this time, emails, which told me she had something she wanted to say carefully enough to write it down. The first one was about the situation with Tyler, and how the university was being reasonable, and how the family needed to demonstrate cohesion. She used the word cohesion. The second email was about what my uncle had said, and how it had been taken out of context, and how Robert had always had a way of inserting himself. The third email said, "Maya, whatever you are feeling right now, please remember that we are your family." I read all three, and sat with them for a long time. I thought about the night my mother sent 7 words and did not think, for even a moment, whether they might be the wrong 7. I typed a response, then I deleted it. Then I wrote a second one, shorter, that said what I actually meant, which was, "I know you're my family. That's why this hurt as much as it did. I'm not ready to talk yet." Then I put the phone down. Over the next 2 weeks, something strange happened, which is that my life kept going, unaccompanied by drama, in a way it hadn't for a long time. A client I had been courting for months sent a signed contract, a branding project, the largest one my studio had ever taken on, with a budget that was more than I had made in the previous 6 months combined. My boyfriend and I had dinner with friends I had been canceling on for a year, and it turned out they were still there and still glad to see me. I started sleeping through the night. My uncle called me on a Sunday afternoon. He didn't lead with an apology, which I respected. He said he hoped I had heard what he said at the reception. I told him I had seen the video. He laughed, a short, dry sound, and said he supposed that was one way for it to reach me. He said he had been biting his tongue for a long time and that Tyler's speech was the thing that finally made him stop. I asked him why that. Specifically, he said, "Because you paid for the opportunity he stood up there and disgraced. And he didn't even very know you were missing from the room." I thought about that after we hung up. I thought about it the way you think about something true. The attorney my grandmother had mentioned called the following week. She was matter-of-fact and efficient, and she told me the documentation was as my grandmother had described. She said there would likely be a process. She said my father would have the opportunity to contest, and that she expected he would, and that based on what she had reviewed, contesting would be difficult. She said, "The will is very clear about who it was written for." I thanked her. I sat in my studio after the call, surrounded by work I had built from nothing, and I thought about my grandfather sitting with me on his porch when I was 12 years old, showing me how to identify trees by the shape of their leaves, taking my questions seriously in the way that certain adults do and most don't. He had known what he was doing. My boyfriend found me that evening at my desk, not working, just sitting. He asked the question he always asked now. I told him the attorney had called. I told him what she said. He nodded slowly and then said, "How does that feel?" I said, "Like I was seen. By someone who isn't here anymore." He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the desk and took my hand and didn't offer any other words, which was exactly right. The requests from my family continued for a while, my mother's emails, my father's voicemails, Tyler's texts that started with, "I know you're probably upset," and ended without ever quite arriving at an apology. I answered none of them at first. Then, I answered Tyler's, once, with a message I kept to one paragraph. I loved him. I had believed in him. I needed some time. I would talk to him when I was ready, and when I did, I hoped we could be honest. He read it, and did not respond. My mother's emails I eventually stopped opening. Not with anger, just with clarity. There was nothing in them I needed to receive right now. Maybe at some point there would be. That point was not yet. What I did instead? I worked. I walked. I drove out to Asheville one Saturday with my boyfriend and stood outside the workshop property on a quiet street and looked at the building that had been sitting in my future for 8 years without my knowing it. It was a small, converted garage with a skylight and a garden behind it that had gone slightly wild, and a wooden sign by the door that said nothing anymore, the letters worn off by rain. My boyfriend stood next to me with his hands in his pockets. He said, "What do you think?" I said, I think I need to learn what to do with a skylight. He laughed. I laughed too. I didn't have answers to everything. I didn't know what my family would become, whether my mother would ever stop explaining things to me in her careful managing tone, whether my father would see what he had done or continue to see only inconvenience. I didn't know what Tyler and I would be to each other on the other side of this. I didn't know exactly what my grandfather had imagined when he updated that document, though I thought I understood the spirit of it. What I knew was that I was 32 years old, and I had spent the better part of a decade being useful to people who did not consider me necessary. I had been the one who transferred money and absorbed crises and left spaces in my life for others to fill with their problems, and I had done it in the belief that if I gave enough, eventually something would be returned. What I know now is that some people are not going to return it, not because they are entirely bad, but because they have not been asked to, and they have no particular incentive to start. The accounting I kept in the hollow of my chest, every sacrificed payment, every cancelled plan, every scholarship to a university I never attended, was a ledger no one else was holding. I was the only one who knew what was written there. The choice I made in Asheville was not a dramatic one. I did not make a speech. I did not confront anyone. I simply decided to stop waiting for the balance to be acknowledged, and to spend the weekend somewhere the water was beautiful instead. And because of that, because I was not there, because I had stopped making myself available, the balance got acknowledged anyway. By my uncle in a reception hall, by my grandmother on her neighbor's phone, by a waterfall in the mountains that had been waiting for me without knowing it. I started speaking publicly about this later that year, nothing big, just a small event at a community center in Raleigh, 25 women in folding chairs, most of them older than me. I had been asked to talk about running a small business as a woman in her 30s, but when I sat down in front of those 25 women and opened my mouth, what came out was different. I said, "The most expensive thing I ever bought was someone else's belief in themselves, and the return on that investment was a text message telling me not to make it about me." I paused. I said, "I want to talk about the moment I decided to stop paying for tables I wasn't allowed to sit at." The room was quiet in the way that rooms are when people recognize something. I talked for 40 minutes. I talked about wire transfers and graduation ceremonies and a grandmother who told the truth too late and a mountain inn in October and a property with a worn wooden sign and a skylight. I talked about what it costs to keep choosing people who have learned to expect it and what it feels like when you stop. When I finished, a woman in the second row, maybe 50, dark hair with silver at the temples, hands folded in her lap, said, "How do you start? How do you actually start saying no?" I thought about that question the same way I thought about my boyfriend's question on the porch that first night in Asheville. With real consideration, searching for the true answer. I said, "You start by going somewhere they're not, even if it's just for a weekend. You start by doing one thing that is only for you, with no utility to anyone else. And in that space, you hear yourself again. And once you can hear yourself, you can't unhear it." The woman nodded. Several others did too. The things I wanted, once I could hear myself. Mornings that belong to me. Work that grows because I chose it. A partner who shows up at my door in 20 minutes. A piece of land with a skylight in a city I love, that has been waiting in my name without my knowing it. Not everything I expected family to look like. Something better than the version I had been given. If you are the one who pays and plans and stays quiet and covers what others leave uncovered, I want you to understand something. The table you keep being asked to set is not being set for you. You can keep setting it, or you can put down the silverware and walk out the door and drive toward the mountains, and let whatever is going to happen, happen, without you there to manage it. The first part is hard. The driving is easy. And the mountains are exactly what you think they are going to be. Share where you are listening from, and tell me what you are finally ready to put down. I read every one.